The year was 2347, and humanity had spent nearly 100 years as members of the Great Galactic Confederation that united dozens of alien species across the stars. Among all the strange and wonderful beings that humans had encountered during their time among the stars, none were quite as fascinating or terrifying as the Valanthid. Valanthi came from the twin moons that orbited a dark planet called Valanthos Prime, and they were a species unlike any other in the known galaxy. Their skin was pale like fresh snow, and their eyes glowed with an unsettling violet light that seemed to pierce through the darkness. They possessed elongated fangs that could extend when they experienced strong emotions, and they required the consumption of iron-rich biological fluids. To survive, humans had quickly started calling them space vampires, though they were always careful never to use that term when Valanthi, where present Commander Daniel Hayes, stood on the bridge of the diplomatic vessel called the Horizon's Edge and read the strangest orders he had ever received in his entire military career. The message came directly from the Valanthi Emperor himself, a being called Kalthrus the Eternal, who had ruled his people for over 3,000 years. The Emperor wanted to discuss forming an alliance against a new threat that was rising in the outer regions of the galaxy. But what made Daniel's hands tremble was not the request for alliance, but rather the nature of the gift the Emperor wished to bestow upon humanity to cement the bond between their two species. The Emperor would send his own daughters to live among the humans. Princess Seraphina and Princess Valentina would be placed under the protection and care of a single human male who had proven himself worthy through acts of courage and honor. That human was a 32-year-old tactical officer named Nathan Cole, who currently served aboard the Horizon's Edge without any idea that his life was about to change forever. 3 years earlier, Nathan had been part of a rescue mission during something called the Krogan Incursion A. Refugee ship carrying Valanthi civilians had been attacked by Krogan raiders, and Nathan had led a small team that saved over 200 lives. He had not known that among those refugees were distant relatives of the Emperor himself. He had not known that his act of simple human decency had caught the attention of one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Now he stood in the docking bay of the Horizon's Edge, watching a Valanthi shuttle descend slowly through the shimmering blue barrier that separated the bay from the cold vacuum of space. Captain Lisa Monroe stood beside him, and her expression was a mixture of amusement and genuine concern for her young officer. "You understand what this means, do you not, Cole?" she asked, while keeping her eyes fixed on the approaching shuttle. "Not really, ma'am," Nathan admitted with complete honesty. "I saved some people who needed saving, and now I am getting princesses as a reward. The Valanthi do not do anything by half measures," the captain explained in a patient tone. "When they offer their nobility to an outsider, it is the highest form of trust their culture can express, and refusing such a gift would be considered an act of war." Nathan felt his stomach drop at those words, but he kept his face calm and professional, as befitting an officer of his rank. The shuttle touched down on a deck with barely a whisper of sound, and the bay fell silent as everyone waited for the doors to open. When they finally did, Nathan felt his breath catch in his throat at the sight before him. Two women emerged from the shuttle, and they were the most beautiful and terrifying beings Nathan had ever seen in his life. Their skin was the color of moonlight and seemed to glow faintly in the artificial lights of the docking bay. Their eyes were a striking shade of violet that seemed almost luminescent, and their movements were graceful in a way that made every human present feel clumsy by comparison. They wore flowing gowns of deep crimson that contrasted sharply with their pale skin and silver hair. Princess Seraphina was the elder of the two, and she appeared to be in her mid-20s by human standards. Though Nathan knew that Valanthi could live for many centuries, her silver hair cascaded past her shoulders like a waterfall of moonlight, and her expression was cold and calculating as she surveyed her new surroundings. There was no warmth in her violet eyes, only a sharp intelligence that seemed to be measuring. Everything and everyone she saw, Princess Valentina, was younger than her sister by approximately 50 Valanti years, which translated to roughly 5 decades in human terms. Her hair was the color of fresh fallen snow, and her eyes held something that her sisters did not. Where Serafina showed only cold calculation, Valentina displayed genuine curiosity about the world around her. Valanthi Herald stepped forward, and his voice resonated through the bay with a deep and commanding tone. By the eternal decree of Emperor Kalthros the Eternal, ruler of Valanthos Prime and all its moons, these daughters of the royal blood are hereby entrusted to Lieutenant Commander Nathan Cole of Earth. The herald paused for a moment before continuing with equal gravity. May this sacred bond strengthen the alliance between our peoples and bring prosperity to both our worlds for generations to come. Nathan stepped forward and did exactly what his rushed cultural briefing had instructed him to do in this situation. He bowed deeply at the waist and placed his right hand over his heart in the traditional Valanti gesture of respect. Then he spoke the words he had frantically memorized during the hour before the shuttle arrived. I accept this honor with gratitude and humility, and I pledge my protection to the daughters of Valanthos for as long as I draw breath. Princess Seraphine's violet eyes narrowed slightly as she studied him with an intensity that made Nathan feel like a specimen under a microscope. Princess Valentina, on the other hand, smiled warmly at his words, and Nathan thought he saw a flicker of genuine pleasure in her luminous eyes. Neither reaction made Nathan feel particularly comfortable about his strange new assignment. Captain Monroe dismissed the assembled crew, and the docking bay slowly emptied as people returned to their regular duties. Nathan found himself standing alone with the 2 princesses and their small retinue of attendants, who were already beginning to unload luggage from the shuttle. I will show you to your quarters, Nathan said while trying to keep his voice steady and professional. They have been specially prepared to accommodate your needs. Serafina regarded him with that same cold expression she had worn since her arrival. Lead the way, human, she said, in a voice that was beautiful and terrible at the same time. Let us see what accommodations your primitive vessel can offer to royalty. Nathan bit back the response that rose to his lips and simply nodded before turning to lead them out of the docking bay. Valentina fell into step beside him, and her presence felt warmer and more welcoming than her sister's icy demeanor. Please forgive my sister, she whispered softly so that only Nathan could hear. She is not pleased about this arrangement, but I am certain she will warm to you in time. Nathan was not certain of that at all, but he appreciated the kind words nonetheless as they walked through the corridors of the Horizon's Edge toward their new shared quarters. Nathan could not help but wonder what strange fate had led him to this moment. Was a simple tactical officer from a small town in Kansas, and now he was responsible for 2 alien vampire princesses who would be living with him for the foreseeable future. His mother had always told him that life would take him on unexpected adventures, but he was fairly certain this was not what she had in mind. The quarters that had been prepared for them were the largest on the ship outside of the captain's own rooms. The lighting had been modified to filter out the specific wavelengths that caused discomfort to Valanti eyes, and the windows were equipped with special shielding. A refrigeration unit had been stocked with synthetic blood supplements that the princesses would need for their survival. Nathan tried not to think too hard about that particular detail. These will be your rooms, he said while gesturing to the spacious living area. I will be in the smaller chamber through that door if you need anything at all. Serafina walked through the space without comment, and her expression gave nothing away about her thoughts. Valentina, however, clasped her hands together with apparent delight. It is lovely, she declared with enthusiasm. Much nicer than I expected from a human vessel, if I am being honest. Nathan supposed that was the closest thing to a compliment he was going to receive today, as He retreated to his own small room and the door closed. Behind him, Nathan leaned against the wall and let out a long breath. Whatever happened next, he knew that his life would never be the same again. The first week of living with the alien princesses was nothing short of a complete disaster for Nathan Cole. He had tried his best to be a good host and protector, but Princess Serafina made it absolutely clear that she viewed the entire arrangement as a personal insult to her dignity. She was a princess of the royal blood and the daughter of an emperor who had ruled for 3,000 years. Being forced to live with what she called a common human soldier was beneath her status in every possible way. She spoke to Nathan only when absolutely necessary, and her words were always clipped and formal and cold. Her violet eyes held a constant hint of disdain whenever she looked in his direction. The only time she seemed to show any emotion other than contempt was when she was speaking with her sister in their native tongue. On the third day of their arrangement, Serafina found Nathan in the common area of their shared quarters. He was performing his morning exercise routine, which consisted of push-ups and other basic movements to keep his body in fighting shape. She stood in the doorway and watched him with an expression that was difficult to read. "You are not what I expected," she said finally in that beautiful and terrible voice of hers. Nathan continued his push-ups without breaking his rhythm because he was determined not to let her rattle him. "I'm sorry to disappoint you, Princess. You misunderstand my meaning, human," she replied while crossing her arms over her chest. "I expected a decorated warrior of great reputation and power when I learned who we would be given to." She paused, and her lip curled slightly in what might have been disgust. "Instead, I find a simple officer who exercises in his undergarments like a common laborer." Nathan finally stopped his routine and looked up at her with a calm expression. "I am wearing shorts, Princess. They are inadequate for proper company." Nathan decided not to argue the point and simply returned to his exercise while Serafina watched him for another long moment before departing. Princess Valentina was the complete opposite of her sister in almost every way. Where Serafina was cold and distant, Valentina was warm and endlessly curious about everything around her. She asked questions about human food and human music and human customs and human history. She wanted to know everything about the strange species that her father had allied with. One particular conversation over breakfast proved to be extremely uncomfortable for Nathan. "I have been reading about human mating customs," Valentina announced cheerfully while Nathan tried to focus on his scrambled eggs. "Your species forms pair bonds based primarily on emotional compatibility rather than political advantage. Is that correct?" Nathan nearly choked on his food at the casual way she discussed such personal matters. "Sometimes it is about emotions and sometimes it is just about convenience," he managed to reply after swallowing. "It really depends on the individual person." Valentina leaned forward with genuine interest, and her violet eyes sparkled with curiosity. "And what about you, Nathan Cole? Have you formed such a bond with anyone?" "No, I have not." "Why not?" Nathan set down his fork and met her gaze directly. "Because I spend most of my time on a spaceship fighting things that want to kill us, and that is not exactly an ideal situation for dating." Valentina considered this information with a thoughtful expression. "Perhaps that will change now that you have us to look after." Before Nathan could formulate a response to that surprising statement, the alarms began blaring throughout the ship. The sound was loud and urgent, and it meant only one thing. The horizon's edge was under attack. Nathan's combat training took over immediately, and he was on his feet before the first alarm had finished sounding. "Both of you, get to the secure bunker now," he ordered while already moving toward the door. "It is the reinforced room in the center of our quarters, and it can withstand a hull breach." Valentina nodded and moved to obey, but Serafina remained where she stood with defiance in her eyes. "I am trained in combat," she declared. "I will not hide like a frightened child while others fight. With respect, Princess, you are not trained in ship-to-ship combat, and you will be in the way." Her eyes flashed dangerously at his words, and for a moment, Nathan thought she might actually attack him. Then the ship rocked violently from a weapon's impact, and Seraphina stumbled forward. Nathan caught her arm to steady her, and for a brief moment, they stood very close together. Something flickered in her violet eyes that Nathan could not identify. "Please," he said in a softer voice than he had used before. "I cannot do my job properly if I am worried about your safety." Something shifted in Seraphine's expression, and after a long moment she nodded once Valentina gently took her sister's hand and guided her toward the secure bunker. Nathan ran to the bridge as fast as his legs could carry him. Battle that followed lasted 43 minutes, and it was one of the most intense engagements of Nathan's career. 3 Krogan Raider ships had dropped out of hyperspace and immediately opened fire on the horizons. Edge Lieutenant Rodriguez was injured in the first exchange of weapons fire, and Nathan took command of the tactical station without hesitation. He coordinated the ship's weapons systems with a precision and skill that impressed even Captain Monroe, who had seen many battles in her long career. When a Krogan boarding party breached the hull and tried to take control of the ship, Nathan led the security team that fought them back. The battle was fierce and brutal, and Nathan took a plasma burn to his shoulder during the fighting. But in the end, the Krogan were defeated and their ships retreated into hyperspace. When Nathan finally returned to his quarters, he was exhausted and bleeding and covered in the grime of battle. He found both princesses waiting for him in the common area with expressions of concern on their pale faces. Valentina gasped at the sight of his wound and immediately rushed toward him. "You are injured," she exclaimed with genuine worry in her voice. "It is nothing serious," Nathan assured her while trying to wave off her concern. The ship's doctor already patched it up. Seraphina stepped forward, and her movements were slow and deliberate, like a predator approaching its prey. She reached up and touched the bandage on his shoulder with fingers that were surprisingly cool against his warm skin. "You fought," she said quietly, "for the ship and for us." "It is my job, Princess." "No," Seraphina replied, and there was something different in her voice now. "It is more than simply doing your job, and I have seen enough soldiers to know the difference." Nathan did not know how to respond to that observation. Valentina appeared at his other side, and her violet eyes were bright with concern, and something else that looked almost like admiration. "Among my people there is a sacred tradition," she explained. "When a protector is injured while defending those in their care, the protected must tend to their wounds as a ritual of gratitude. That really is not necessary." Nathan protested, but both princesses ignored his objections and guided him firmly but gently to a chair. For the next hour they cared for his wound using techniques that Nathan did not recognize. Seraphina explained that it was Volanthi medicine based on accelerated cellular regeneration. The process involved certain compounds found in their saliva that promoted rapid healing. Nathan decided not to think too carefully about the implications of that particular detail. When they were finished, his shoulder felt better than it had in years, and the pain had almost completely disappeared. Seraphina looked at him, and Nathan noticed that the disdain in her eyes had been replaced by something else entirely. It was an expression he could not quite identify, but it made his heart beat a little faster. "You continue to surprise me, Nathan Cole," she said softly. "I suppose that makes 2 of us, Princess." Valentina smiled at the exchange, and there was something knowing in her expression. "Perhaps this arrangement will not be so terrible after all," she said. Nathan was beginning to think she might be right about that as the sisters retired to their chambers for the night. Nathan sat alone in the common area and thought about everything that had happened. Had started this day as a reluctant guardian forced into an impossible situation by galactic politics, but something had changed during the battle and its aftermath. He could not explain exactly what it was, but he felt a connection to these strange and beautiful alien women that had not existed before. Whatever the future held, Nathan knew that his relationship with the princesses would never be the same again. They gave 2 alien vampire princesses to a human man as a diplomatic gesture. Part 3. The hunt. 2 months had passed since the alien princesses arrived aboard the Horizon's Edge, and Nathan Cole had learned many things about his unusual charges. Learned that Valentina could spend hours reading human literature and asking questions about the stories she discovered. He learned that Serafina practiced combat forms in the early morning hours when she thought no one was watching. He learned that both sisters had a fondness for a human beverage called hot chocolate, which they found surprisingly pleasant. But the most important thing Nathan learned was that Valanthe did not handle confinement very well at all. The princesses had been restricted to the ship for security reasons ever since the Krogan attack 2 months earlier. Captain Monroe had received intelligence reports suggesting that the Krogan might specifically target the princesses to damage the alliance between humans. And Valenthiso, the sisters were confined to the ship for their own protection, and they were slowly going mad because of it. Nathan found Serafina one night on the observation deck staring out at the endless stars with an expression of pure hunger on her face. "You cannot sleep, princess?" he asked while moving to stand beside her at the massive window. "I do not require sleep the way your kind does," she replied without looking at him, "but I require movement and space and the hunt." She finally turned to face him, and Nathan noticed that her pupils had dilated until the violet of her eyes was nearly consumed by darkness. "You cannot understand what this feels like," she continued. "Your species evolved as prey animals hiding from predators in the darkness of your primitive world." Her voice dropped to something almost like a growl. "My species is the predator, and we were not meant to be caged," Nathan considered her words carefully before responding. "I understand what it feels like to be trapped," he said quietly. "I may not be a predator like you, but I know the frustration of being confined when every part of you wants to run free." Serafina studied him with those dark eyes for a long moment. "Perhaps you do understand better than I thought. The ship is scheduled to stop at Relay Station Gamma 7 in 3 days for resupply," Nathan offered. "It is a large station with plenty of open spaces to explore, and maybe the captain would approve a supervised trip outside the ship." Something flickered in Seraphine's eyes that looked almost like hope before her usual mask of cold indifference returned. "You would speak to the captain on our behalf." "I would be happy to try." 3 days later, Nathan found himself walking through the crowded corridors of Relay Station Gamma 7, with both princesses at his side. Captain Monroe had approved the trip with strict conditions that Nathan was to remain with the princesses at all times, and they were to stay within the secure zones of the station. Valentina was absolutely delighted by the experience, and she dragged Nathan and her sister from one merchant stall to another. She marveled at the incredible variety of goods available from dozens of different alien species. When she discovered a human dessert called ice cream, she declared it to be the finest thing she had ever tasted in her entire life. Serafina was more reserved in her reactions, but Nathan caught her smiling several times when she thought no one was paying attention. The trouble began when they reached the lower market section of the Station. A group of 5 Krogan mercenaries had spotted the princesses and recognized their species. Immediatelevon were extremely rare outside their home star system, and their distinctive pale skin and glowing violet eyes made them impossible to miss. The mercenaries began following them through the crowded market, while staying just far enough away to avoid a direct confrontation. But they were close enough to make their intentions perfectly clear. Nathan noticed them within seconds of their approach, and his combat training kicked in immediately. He guided the princesses toward a more crowded section of the market while hoping to lose the tail among the press of alien bodies. But the Krogan were persistent hunters, and the crowds eventually thinned as they approached the edges of the secure zone. "We have company," Nathan said in a low voice meant only for the princesses to hear. Serafina's entire posture changed in an instant as her predatory instincts took over. "I am aware of them," she replied in an equally quiet voice. "There are 5 of them, and the leader carries a plasma pistol that is poorly concealed under his jacket." "How can you possibly know that from this distance? I can smell the metal and the chemical residue of the weapon." Nathan filed that useful information away for later consideration. "Stay behind me and we will head for the security checkpoint. I will not run from these animals." Serafina hissed with fury in her voice. "And I will not let you get killed, just to satisfy your pride, so please move now." They made it about halfway to the checkpoint before the Krogan decided to make their move. The leader stepped directly into their path, and his scarred face twisted into an ugly smile that revealed rows of sharp yellow teeth. "Volanthi princesses wandering so far from home," he said in a mocking tone. "Our employer would pay very handsomely for your safe return to Volanthos Prime." "Your employer?" Nathan asked while keeping his hand close to the weapon at his hip. "The Krogan Dominion has many powerful friends throughout the galaxy, and some of those friends would love to have leverage over the Volanthi Emperor." Valentina moved closer to Nathan, and he could see the fear in her luminous eyes. Serafina simply stared at the mercenary with an expression of cold murderous fury. "This is your last chance," Nathan said in a calm and steady voice. "Walk away now and no one needs to get hurt." The Krogan leader laughed, and the sound was harsh and ugly. "One single human and 2 pampered princesses against 5 trained warriors seems like we will take our chances." What happened next would be discussed in station security briefings for many years to come. Nathan drew his weapon and fired in a single fluid motion that came from years of combat training. The shot caught the lead Krogan directly in the shoulder, and the mercenary stumbled backward with a roar of pain and surprise before the other Krogan could react. Nathan kicked out hard and connected with the knee of the nearest attacker. Sound of breaking bone was loud and sickening, and the Krogan fell to the ground, screaming in agony. But it was Serafina who truly ended the fight before it could really begin. She moved faster than Nathan's eyes could track, and she became a blur of silver hair and crimson fabric. Her fingernails, which Nathan had always assumed were merely decorative, extended into razor-sharp claws that gleamed in the station's artificial light. She disarmed one Krogan with a lightning-fast strike to his wrist that shattered the bones. Then she opened his throat with a casual backhand slash that sprayed dark blood across the market floor. Before the body had even finished falling, she had already disabled 2 more mercenaries with brutal efficiency. The last surviving Krogan took one look at the carnage around him and fled into the crowd as fast as his legs could carry him. Serafina stood among the fallen bodies with her pale gown stained with alien blood in her breathing only slightly elevated from the exertion. She turned to face Nathan, and he saw that her fangs had extended into 2 gleaming points that had not been visible before. "You fought well," she said as casually as if they were discussing the weather. "So did you," Nathan replied while holstering his weapon. "Though you might have mentioned earlier that you could do all of that. I did tell you that I was trained in combat." Valentina emerged from behind a market stall where she had wisely taken cover during the fight. Her eyes went wide as she looked at her sister standing among the bodies. "Sira, your fangs are showing." Seraphine's hand flew to her mouth, and Nathan watched as she visibly struggled to retract her extended fangs. When she finally lowered her hand, she looked almost embarrassed, which was an expression Nathan had never seen on her face before. "Combat arousal," she explained in a stiff and formal voice. "It is a physiological response to violence, and it is considered extremely improper to display one's fangs in public company. We probably have bigger problems than etiquette right now," Nathan said, while nodding toward the approaching station security team. "Let me handle the talking." It took 3 hours to sort out the entire situation with the station authorities. Security Footage confirmed that the Krogan had started the fight, and their identities were linked to a known criminal organization captain. Monroe was furious about the security breach, but she ultimately commended Nathan for his handling of the dangerous situation that night when they had returned safely to their quarters aboard the Horizon's Edge. Serafina approached Nathan with an expression he had never seen before. She looked vulnerable in a way that seemed impossible for someone so fierce and proud. "I must apologize to you," she said quietly, "for revealing my true nature in such a violent manner." She paused, and something that might have been shame flickered in her violet eyes. "I know that humans find our predatory aspects disturbing, and I did not wish for you to see me that way." Nathan thought carefully about his response before speaking. "I have seen many terrible things during my years of service," he said honestly. "Creatures that would give most people nightmares for the rest of their lives." He met her eyes directly and let her see the truth in his words. "Watching you take down some Krogan mercenaries does not even make my top 10 list of frightening experiences. You are not repulsed by what I am. Princess, you saved my life today." 6 months had passed since the princesses first arrived, and Nathan Cole was beginning to realize that he had a very serious problem. He was falling in love with them, both of them. The realization had crept up on him slowly like the rising tide of an ocean he did not know existed. It was not a sudden moment of understanding, but rather the accumulation of countless small moments that added together into something much larger. He loved the way Valentina laughed at his terrible jokes, even when they were not funny at all. He loved the way her violet eyes lit up with curiosity whenever she discovered something new about human culture. He loved the way Seraphine's cold expression would soften when she thought no one was watching her. He loved the way she would bring him a cup of tea without being asked when she noticed he had been working too long. He loved their late-night conversations about their different cultures and their fears and their hopes for the future. The situation became significantly more complicated when Nathan learned about certain aspects of Volanthi biology. Serafina made the announcement one morning in her usual matter-of-fact manner, as if she were discussing nothing more important than the weather. "My sister and I are entering a biological phase called the culmination," she said while Nathan nearly choked on his morning coffee. "It occurs approximately once every decade for unbonded females of our species." "I am sorry, but what exactly does that mean?" Nathan asked after recovering from his surprise. Valentina's usual cheerfulness was dampened by obvious concern as she continued the explanation. "During the culmination, our body chemistry shifts dramatically, and it demands that we form a permanent bond with a mate." She paused, and her violet eyes were filled with worry. "If we do not successfully bond during this period, we will enter a state of physical decline, and our bodies will begin to consume themselves from within." Nathan felt his heart drop into his stomach at those words. "Within approximately 2 years we would die," Serafina added calmly. "And you're just telling me about this now?" Nathan demanded with more emotion in his voice than he intended. "We had hoped to return home to Volanthos Prime before it became relevant," Serafina explained. "But the alliance negotiations have stretched on much longer than anyone anticipated." She met his eyes directly, and Nathan saw something vulnerable beneath her usual mask of cold control. "Our father has made it clear that any bond we form must be with you, or the diplomatic consequences would be catastrophic for both our peoples." Nathan stood up from his chair and walked to the window to stare out at the stars while his mind raced with implications. "So you're telling me that you have to bond with me, or you will die?" he asked without turning around. "Both of you? The choice is entirely yours to make," Valentina said softly from behind him. "We would never force such a thing upon anyone, and we know this is not what you agreed to when you accepted this assignment. But you deserve to know the truth," Serafina added, "so that you can make an informed decision." "What does bonding actually mean?" Nathan asked while finally turning to face them. Is it similar to human marriage? Serafina rose from her seat and moved to stand beside him at the window. It is far deeper than your human concept of marriage, she explained. It is a blood bond formed through the exchange of vital essence between partners. She paused to let that information sink in before continuing. Once the bond is established, it cannot ever be broken by any means, and we would feel your emotions and sense your presence across vast distances. You would have the same connection to us, Valentina added while joining them at the window. And during the ritual, I would drink your blood, Nathan said slowly as understanding dawned. A small amount during the ceremony, yes, Serafina confirmed. And you would drink ours as well because the mutual exchange is what creates the permanent bond between us. Nathan was silent for a long moment as he processed everything he had just learned. He thought about the past 6 months and everything that had happened between them. He thought about the arguments they had shared and the laughter that followed. He thought about the moments of danger they had faced together and the quiet, peaceful evenings in their shared quarters. He had started this assignment viewing it as nothing more than a duty forced upon him by circumstances beyond his control somewhere along the way that had changed into something much more meaningful. What if I said yes? He asked quietly. Both princesses went completely still at his words. You would actually consider this, Valentina whispered, and her voice was barely audible. Nathan turned to face them both directly. I have spent 6 months getting to know you, he said, honestly. Valentina, your endless curiosity and genuine kindness remind me why humanity ever bothered reaching for the stars in the first place. He shifted his gaze to the elder sister. And Serafina, beneath all that royal ice you are one of the strongest and most loyal people I have ever had the privilege to know. He took a deep breath before continuing. I am not saying this because diplomatic necessity forces my hand, and I'm not saying this because I feel obligated by duty. He let them see the truth in his eyes. I am saying this because somewhere along the way, I fell in love with both of you, and I know that sounds completely insane, and I know it does not make any logical sense. He gave a small, helpless shrug. But when has anything about this entire situation ever made sense? Serafina moved first, and she closed the distance between them with her characteristic predatory grace. She placed her cool hand on his chest directly over his heart, and her violet eyes searched his face intently. You speak the truth, she said with wonder in her voice. I can hear it in the rhythm of your heartbeat. Valentina joined them, and her cool fingers intertwined gently with Nathan's. Among my people, it is not unusual for one male to bond with multiple females, especially those of high royal status, she explained. But you are human, and your customs and expectations are very different from ours. My customs can adapt to new circumstances, Nathan replied firmly. The bonding ceremony took place 3 days later in a private chamber aboard the Horizon's Edge. Captain Monroe presided over the ritual after obtaining special authorization from both the Earth Federation and the Volante Empire. A small group of witnesses attended, and their expressions ranged from genuine diplomatic interest to barely concealed astonishment at what they were seeing. The ceremony itself was ancient and conducted entirely in the old tongue of Valanthos that had not changed in over 10,000 years. Nathan spoke the vows he had carefully memorized, and his voice remained steady despite his racing heart. When the moment arrived for the blood exchange, he did not hesitate or flinch. Serafina's bite was precise and surgical, with her fangs piercing the vein in his wrist with perfect accuracy. The sensation was strange and unlike anything Nathan had ever experienced before. It was a cold heat that spread up his arm and into his chest like fire made of ice. When she finally withdrew her fangs, her lips were stained crimson with his blood. Her violet eyes met his with an intensity that stole the breath from his lungs. Valentina followed, and her bite was gentler but no less meaningful. When it came time for Nathan to drink from them, he did so without hesitation. Their blood was cool and sweet on his tongue like nothing he had ever tasted. As he drank, he felt something fundamental shift deep inside himself. A connection ancient and powerful settled into his very soul as if it had always belonged there. He could feel them now in a way he had never felt anyone before. Their joy and relief and love flowed through the newly formed bond like water filling an empty vessel. It filled spaces inside him that he had never known were empty until this very moment. The blessing of Emperor Calthorus arrived via quantum communication that very evening. The ancient ruler of the vampire species officially welcomed Nathan Cole into the royal family of Valantos Prime. Nathan stood in their quarters that night with his wives beside him, still adjusting to the strange, wonderful sensation of their emotions humming at the edge of his consciousness. He decided that his life had officially become stranger than any fiction he had ever read. But as Serafina took his left hand and Valentina took his right, he also decided that he would not have it any other way. Whatever challenges the future might bring, he would face them with his new family at his side, and together there was nothing in the galaxy they could not overcome. The attack came without any warning on a quiet morning. Exactly 1 year after the bonding ceremony, the Krogan Dominion had spent months gathering their forces in secret, and now they launched a massive coordinated assault on Valanthos Prime itself. Their goal was brutally simple in its ambition. They wanted to destroy the homeworld of their ancient enemies and eliminate the alliance that threatened their expansion into Federation territory. Nathan felt the exact moment when Serafina learned of the attack through their shared bond. Her fury and terror exploded through their connection, like a solar flare erupting from a dying star. He was standing at the tactical station on the bridge of the Horizon's Edge, where he now served as first officer under Captain Monroe. Serafina burst onto the bridge seconds later with Valentina close behind her. "My home is burning," Serafina declared, and her voice was tight with barely controlled rage. "My people are dying while we sit here doing nothing. We are aware of the situation," Captain Monroe replied, and her tone was calm but filled with urgency. "The Federation fleet is mobilizing as we speak, and we are part of the relief force." The battle for Valanthos Prime would eventually go down in history as the largest military engagement since the formation of the Galactic Confederation. 37 Federation warships dropped out of hyperspace above the Valanthi homeworld and joined forces with what remained of the defending fleet together. They faced the massive Krogan armada in a desperate fight for the survival of an entire civilization. The Horizon's Edge had been upgraded with enhanced weapon systems since being designated as the official diplomatic liaison vessel. Nathan coordinated the ship's tactical operations with precision born from years of combat experience. Through the bond, he could feel fragments of what his wives were experiencing. Both sisters had insisted on joining boarding parties against the Krogan vessels. Serafina's cold fury as she cut through Krogan Marines with her deadly claws. Valentina's fear transformed into desperate courage as she protected wounded crew members. The connection allowed Nathan to anticipate their needs and direct supporting fire exactly when they required it most. But it was the turning point of the battle that would cement Nathan Cole's legend. For generations to come, the Krogan flagship had broken through the defensive perimeter and was heading directly for the capital city of Valanthos Prime. Its shields were too powerful for conventional weapons to penetrate, and the Valanthi orbital defense platforms had been destroyed in the opening moments of the attack. Millions of innocent lives hung in the balance with every passing second. Nathan saw an opportunity that no one else had noticed in the chaos of battle. A damaged Krogan cruiser was drifting between the flagship and the Horizon's Edge with its reactor core seconds away from critical failure. "Captain, I need direct control of the helm," Nathan said, and his voice cut through the noise of the bridge. "What exactly are you planning, Cole?" Monroe demanded. "Something incredibly stupid," he admitted honestly. "But you need to trust me right now." Monroe held his gaze for a long tense moment before nodding her approval. do what you need to do." Nathan took control of the ship and piloted the Horizon's edge directly into the dangerous debris field. He used the dying cruiser as cover from the flagship's sensors until they were too close for the enemy to react. Then he synchronized their weapons fire with the exact moment of the cruiser's reactor explosion. The blast was channeled directly into the flagship's weakened rear shields. The resulting detonation was so massive that it was visible from the surface of Volantos Prime itself, with their flagship destroyed and their command structure in complete chaos. The Krogan fleet began a disorganized retreat. Federation reinforcements arrived minutes later and completed the base that raided the base, or the Narration reinforcements urged minutes later and completed the destruction of the enemy forces. Volantos Prime was saved. Nathan barely had time to register their victory before unconsciousness claimed him. Physical and mental strain of piloting through the explosion had overwhelmed his human body. He collapsed at the helm station as his wife screamed his name through their body. Woke 3 days later in a Volanti medical facility surrounded by both familiar and unfamiliar faces. Serafina sat at his right side with her pale hand clasped tightly around his. Valentina occupied his left, with her head resting gently on his shoulder, and standing at the foot of his bed was a figure Nathan had only ever seen in official portraits. Emperor Kalthros, the Eternal himself, had come to see the human who had saved his world. "So this is the man who saved my homeworld and won the hearts of my daughters," the Emperor said, and his voice was a deep rumble that seemed to resonate in Nathan's very bones. Nathan tried to sit up to show proper respect, but Seraphine's firm hand on his chest kept him in place. "Stay where you are, husband," she commanded. "You are still recovering from your ordeal, but the Emperor is standing right there at the foot of my bed. He can wait." Serafina replied without any trace of irony in her voice. Kalthros laughed, and the sound was like distant thunder rolling across mountain peaks. "She has her mother's fierce spirit, this one," he observed with obvious pride. "Very well, Nathan Cole, you may rest for now, but we have much to discuss when you have recovered your strength." Over the following weeks, Nathan learned the full extent of what the battle had cost and what it had achieved. The Krogan dominion was shattered, and their once mighty fleet reduced to scattered remnants fleeing into the darkness between stars. The alliance between the Federation and the Volanthi Empire had been forged in blood and fire, stronger than any treaty could ever have made it, and Nathan Cole had become something unprecedented in galactic history. He was now a human prince of Volantos. Prime Kalthros granted him a title that had no direct translation in any human language. The closest approximation was something like Blood Guardian of the Eternal Realm. It was an honor that had not been given to anyone outside the Volanti species in over 3,000 years. But the most important news came from his wives on a quiet evening. When Nathan was finally well enough to leave the medical facility, Valentina delivered the announcement with her characteristic enthusiasm, and she nearly tackled him in her excitement. They were going to be parents. Serafina confirmed the news with a rare display of emotional vulnerability as tears glistened in her violet eyes. "The children will be hybrids," she explained while resting one hand on her own stomach. "Part human and part Volanti, combined into something entirely new. They will be the first of their kind in all of galactic history," Valentina added with wonder in her voice. Nathan pulled both his wives into his arms, and their bond hummed with shared joy and anticipation. "I do not care what species they are classified as," he said firmly. "They are ours, and that is all that matters." The twins were born 6 months later on a bright morning aboard the Horizon's Edge. Boy and a girl with their mother's luminous violet eyes and their father's stubborn, determined chin. They named them Anthony and Catherine, choosing human names to honor Nathan's heritage while raising them in both Volanti and human traditions. The boy developed his first fangs at 3 months old, which caused quite a stir among the human medical staff. The Girl demonstrated a strong appetite for synthetic blood supplements by 6 months, but they also inherited their father's warmth and his easy laughter and his absolute refusal to back down from any challenges. Nathan stood in the nursery of their permanent quarters aboard the horizon's edge, watching his children sleep peacefully in their cribs. He reflected on the incredible journey that had brought him to this moment. He had started as a simple tactical officer from a small town in Kansas who just wanted to do his duty and serve his people. Now he was a prince of an alien vampire empire with 2 beautiful wives and 2 hybrid children who would help shape the future of 2 civilizations. Having deep thoughts, my love? Serafina asked as she appeared silently at his side. Just thinking about how strange my life has become. Nathan admitted with a small smile. She smiled back at him, and the expression was warm and genuine and full of love. You saved 2 alien vampire princesses and married them both and became royalty of an empire, she observed. Strange might be something of an understatement. Valentina joined them and draped herself over Nathan's back in a manner that would have scandalized the Valanti court. She had never cared much for proper royal behavior. The children are sleeping soundly, she reported. We have perhaps 2 hours before Anthony demands his midnight feeding. Then we should make the most of our time, Nathan suggested. He turned to face his wives, these beautiful and terrifying and wonderful women who had somehow become his entire world. Through their bond, he felt their love as vast and eternal as the stars themselves. I love you both, he said. I know I do not say it often enough with words, but I want you to know. You say it every moment of every day, Serafina replied while touching his chest over his heart. We feel it right here through our connection, always and forever. Valentina agreed with a brilliant smile. Outside the viewport, the stars burned cold and bright against the infinite void of space. Somewhere out there, new challenges awaited and new threats would eventually arise. But whatever dangers the future might bring, Nathan knew he would face them with his family beside him, because that was what humanity did when faced with the impossible. They adapted, and they survived, and they found ways to thrive against all odds. They took alien vampire princesses, offered as diplomatic gestures in turn,